You weren't supposed to know this. The Follings weren't just a family. They were an experiment. Imagine 12 children plucked from the shadows of society, all adopted into one household. No records, no birth certificates, no official proof they had ever been born. They existed only within the walls of that house, like ghosts given flesh. And yet, the deeper you look, the more it feels as if someone wanted them erased before they ever drew breath. History books will not teach you this. The archives whisper their names only in fragments, and even those fragments are coated in contradiction. How can 12 children live, eat, breathe, play, and yet leave behind no trace? What sort of power can blot a child out of existence so thoroughly that even the government refuses to acknowledge their lives? The answer is not simple, because the Follings were not a simple family. Their home was not a sanctuary, but a laboratory of control, an arena where innocence was tested against secrecy, and where children became pawns in a game far older than America itself. And here is where the unease sets in. Who gave them those children? Who allowed 12 living beings to be raised off the grid in a society that prided itself on census, record-keeping, and ownership of every life within its borders? The story of the Follings is not just about 12 children. It is about the machinery of power that decides which lives are counted and which can be erased without consequence. The Folling children were hidden not because they were orphans, but because they were meant to be untraceable, disposable, test subjects for forces that moved behind the veil. Most people will hear this and scoff. They will tell you it's a coincidence, a clerical error, a myth blown out of proportion. But ask yourself this: how many clerical errors does it take before a pattern becomes undeniable? And if 12 vanished childhoods can be excused, how many more could exist right now, unnoticed, undocumented, unseen? This isn't a story about the past. It is a mirror, and if you keep watching, you will see what most men can't stomach. That the very institutions you trust to protect life have long perfected the art of controlling it, erasing it, and remolding it in secret. The Follings were not wealthy. They were not aristocrats or landowners. They were ordinary, or at least they appeared to be. And that is the first deception. Because only those who serve power in silence are allowed to wield it invisibly. The family lived in an unremarkable house on the edge of town, but their neighbors whispered, whispers that would later be buried under decades of silence. People spoke of strange routines, children seen marching in lines at dawn, voices chanting, hymns not recognized in any church. And always the count was wrong. Sometimes there were 10 children, sometimes 11, sometimes 15, but never 12. That number, 12, was the official narrative. Yet eyewitnesses suggest the Follings had more or less, or that children appeared and vanished overnight. Ask yourself, what is more terrifying? That they kept too many, or that they sometimes had fewer? Records from orphanages at the time show nothing. Not one transfer, not one adoption form. The paper trail ends in smoke as if someone scorched the evidence. But the pattern is older than the Follings. Governments, churches, and secret societies have always experimented with those who have no one to defend them. The poor, the orphaned, the forgotten. They are clay for the sculptors of control. Why 12? Because 12 is the number of order. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, 12 months of the year. To take 12 nameless, faceless children and strip them of identity is not random. It is ritual. It is symbolic erasure, a dark mirror of divine order twisted into human hands. The neighbors remember the children rarely smiled. They never mingled with others in town. They were dressed the same, fed the same, punished the same. Some called it discipline. Others called it a cult. and those who asked too many questions were met with silence from the local authorities. One sheriff, when pressed, said only this: "The Follings have friends in places you don't want to know about." Then he walked away. The story could have ended there, dismissed as rural gossip, if not for what came next. Because one by one those children began to vanish. Some said they ran away, others claimed they were sent back. But to where? No one knew where they came from in the first place, and with no records, no birth certificates, no official existence, when they disappeared completely. The question you must ask now is this: were the Follings caretakers of children, or keepers of an experiment designed to test how easily lives can be created and destroyed without ever being seen? To understand the Follings, you must strip away the illusion of family. The word itself is a mask. In their house, the children were not treated as sons and daughters but as property, interchangeable, replaceable, without identity. When outsiders visited, the children spoke in rehearsed phrases, never deviating, never improvising. Their movements were synchronized, their expressions vacant. One guest wrote in a private letter, "It was like walking into a room full of mannequins who breathed." But the truth is darker than vacant stares. Some survivors, though few dare speak openly, claim the children were forced to play roles, as if their very personalities were assigned. One would be the obedient son, another, the rebellious one, another, the silent shadow. But these roles shifted over time, like masks passed from one child to another. Imagine being told you are no longer yourself, but now must become your brother, your sister, your double. The Follings weren't raising children. They were erasing identity and testing whether selfhood could be manufactured and swapped like costumes. Why? Because identity is the last defense against control. Strip it away, and a human becomes pliable, programmable, a vessel waiting to be filled. These children, without names etched into law or record, were test cases. They belonged to no one, which meant they could become anyone. And the institutions around them, schools, churches, courts, looked the other way. Did they not see? Or did they understand that what the Follings were doing served a purpose bigger than their small community? Consider the possibility. The family wasn't rogue. They were a cog in a hidden machinery, one node of a network that tested methods of control in plain sight, while the public shrugged it off as eccentricity. Think about this. If 12 children can be molded into silence, obedience, and ritual without leaving behind even the proof of their birth, what stops the same system from doing it on a larger scale? What if the erasure of the individual, the rewriting of identity, is not a relic of the past, but the blueprint for the future? The Follings may have appeared powerless, but in truth they revealed the oldest secret of governance. That control is not about armies or weapons, but about the ability to define who a person is, and whether that person is allowed to exist at all. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. There is a pattern in history the public is never meant to notice. Every time you find a story like the Follings, children without records, people without names, you find institutions lurking in the background. Not openly, not with banners and declarations, but in whispers, signatures, and sealed documents. With the Follings, it was the church that stood closest. Not the church of Sunday sermons and hymns, but a sect that styled itself as guardians of purity. They preached obedience, silence, and the annihilation of the self before God. To them, individuality was sin, and the child was clay. Neighbors recall ministers visiting the Folling home late at night, carriages pulling up long after midnight, figures cloaked in black stepping inside. They stayed for hours, and when they left, the children were made to chant in the yard. These were not hymns but strange recitations, fragments of Latin and broken scripture, words that the neighbors did not recognize but could never forget. And yet when one man attempted to report this to the authorities, he was turned away. The judge told him the church had special privileges and that it was better for everyone if he let the matter rest. What does that tell you? It tells you the experiment was sanctioned. The erasure of identity, the molding of children. It was not the madness of a single family. It was a sanctioned trial in the science of obedience. This is where it connects to the broader machinery. Governments, religions, secret orders, call them what you will, all thrive on the same principle. You do not need to control the masses if you can erase the individual. Make a man nameless, and you can rewrite him. Make a child faceless, and you can program him to worship the system that erased him. That is how power multiplies in silence. The Follings were not the architects. They were operators, pawns serving something older, something that understood the importance of 12 blank slates. 12 empty vessels arranged like hours on a clock, like points on a ritual circle. Do you think it's coincidence? Or do you see the deeper truth? Because here is the part that unsettles even the strongest men. What if those children were not erased to be forgotten, but erased to be remembered differently? What if their disappearance was not an end, but a transformation? Proof that identity itself is a currency that can be stripped, stolen, and reassigned. This is not about one family. It is about a blueprint that still operates today. Inside the Folling home, daily life was not life at all. It was programming. Survivors describe mornings that began before dawn, the children dragged from bed and forced into silence. They ate in silence, studied in silence, prayed in silence. Any sound beyond what was permitted resulted in punishment. Not punishment as you imagine it, but punishment designed to rewrite the brain. Hours forced to kneel on stone. Days of isolation in a locked cellar with no light. Meals withheld not to starve, but to fracture the sense of time itself. This is how psychological control works. It is not about breaking the body. It is about teaching the mind that reality is dictated by the hand that punishes and the hand that feeds. The Follings mastered this. The children were conditioned to believe their thoughts were not their own. That obedience was safety. That individuality was death. And yet, there was something stranger still. Each week, one child was singled out as the forgotten. The others were told not to speak to them, not to acknowledge their existence. For 7 days, that child ceased to exist in the household. Imagine what that does to a developing mind. To be erased by those who share your suffering, to feel your own siblings instructed to look through you as though you were nothing. Do you see the brilliance of it? They weren't just controlling behavior. They were testing whether identity itself could be stripped away by consensus. If 12 children agreed that one did not exist, then in that house, they truly didn't. And once a child accepted that erasure, the cycle would move on, another would be chosen, and another. The method is ancient. Tribes once used exile. Empires used damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a name from history. The Follings did the same, but with children, shaping them into living experiments of absence. And when a child was finally sent away, no one asked where they went. Because by then, the others had already been conditioned to accept disappearance as normal. Think about it. If a group can be taught to erase one of their own, willingly, without violence, without resistance, what does that say about society at large? What does that say about you? How many names, how many lives have been erased from the world because the system trained others to look through them, as if they were never there? The Follings were not just a family. They were the template. The story of the Follings might seem isolated, 12 children in a forgotten house, lost in the cracks of history. But the pattern is far bigger. Look deeper into history and you will find the same experiment running again and again. Orphans swept off the streets of London during the plague years, loaded onto ships bound for the New World. No records, no names. Thousands of children who vanished into the soil of America, remembered only as cargo. In Russia, entire orphan trains emptied villages, scattering nameless children across the empire, stripped of family and identity so they could be molded into soldiers and laborers. This is the truth. Whenever power seeks to expand, it begins with the nameless. Children without papers, people without records, lives that can be erased without consequence. The Follings were not inventing this, they were participating in a machinery that stretches across centuries. Ask yourself why governments obsess over documentation, birth certificates, social security numbers, passports. It is not to give you freedom, it is to claim ownership. A birth certificate is not proof of your existence, it is proof of their jurisdiction over you. So what happens when children exist without one? They are not free, they are outside the law, outside protection, outside recognition. They become pure clay, a resource to be shaped by anyone with the power to claim them. And yet, there is another layer. Because sometimes the erasure is not accidental, but deliberate. Whole populations have been wiped from history, their names excised, their records destroyed. Ask the descendants of indigenous tribes whose ancestors were renamed, rebranded, their children taken to institutions where they were beaten for speaking their language. Ask the families of enslaved Africans whose genealogy was severed by design, so they could never reclaim their roots. Do you see it now? The Follings were not just a grotesque anomaly. They were a miniature version of how empires operate. The principle is always the same. Erase the name, break the identity, rewrite the soul. From children in one house, to tribes, to nations, the machinery scales endlessly. And here is where it pierces the present. The same blueprint is alive today. The same systems of erasure are hidden in plain sight, repackaged as policy, as education, as culture itself. They want you to believe your individuality is intact. But tell me, how much of who you are was chosen by you, and how much was scripted long before you could speak? The Follings were not a relic. They were a warning. The walls of the Folling home were the blueprint, but the factory that grew from that blueprint was society itself. Think of the classroom you sat in as a child, rows of desks, identical schedules, bells dictating when you could speak, when you could eat, when you could leave. You were not being educated, you were being conditioned to obey time, authority, and uniformity. Just like the Folling children, told when to stand, when to sit, when to speak. Do you see the symmetry? What was tested on 12 nameless children in a hidden house has been replicated across nations. Schools became the training grounds for obedience. Churches became the sanctuaries where individuality was labeled sin. Governments became the record keepers who decide whether you exist or not. The blueprint scaled perfectly because it was never about raising individuals. It was about manufacturing citizens. And the most brilliant stroke of all, they convinced you it was normal. That lining up, repeating words in unison, pledging loyalty to a flag or a creed was just the way things are. But to the Follings, it was ritual. And to the institutions that rule you now, it still is. There is a reason the children of the Follings had no birth certificates. They were proof of concept. Could a human be trained to live as property without the state acknowledging they ever existed? Could individuality be stripped so thoroughly that even memory bends around it? The answer, horrifyingly, was yes, and the institutions studied it. They learned. And then they built entire systems around it. Look around. Do you think you are free because you have a name in a database? Or are you just a recorded resource catalogued for taxation, for surveillance, for labor? The Folling children had no names, and so they could be erased. You do have a name, but it was issued to you, owned by them, tied to contracts you never signed. Do you truly believe there is a difference? Here is the forbidden truth. You are still inside the experiment. The walls have expanded, the rules disguised, the punishments replaced with subtler forms of control. But the essence is the same. You were never meant to be sovereign. You were meant to be programmable. And if you are still watching, it means some part of you already knows this. 12 was not an accident. The Follings could have adopted 6. They could have taken 10. But they chose 12. Why? Because 12 is the number of order. 12 apostles surrounding Christ. 12 tribes forming Israel. 12 constellations etched into the heavens. 12 months binding time itself. To ancient systems of power, 12 was never just a number. It was a sacred circle, a framework of control. By adopting 12 children and stripping them of names, the Follings weren't just raising orphans. They were building a living calendar, a human zodiac, a ritual wheel that could be turned and spun by those who understood how numbers channel power. Each child, nameless, faceless, interchangeable, became a point on that circle. And when one vanished, the circle was broken, only to be repaired by another brought into the fold. Always 12. Always complete. This was not family. This was ritual architecture. And the ritual was one of erasure. To take 12 living souls and deny them the dignity of record, of birth, of individuality. This is inversion, a dark mirror of creation. What God names, the Follings unnamed. What the universe orders, they disordered. Neighbors reported that on certain nights, all 12 children were forced into the yard, standing in a circle. Candles lit, hands clasped. Their voices rising in unison, chanting phrases that blended scripture with something far older, something unrecognizable. Some said they saw symbols drawn in ash on the ground. Others claimed the children's voices carried unnaturally far, echoing like more than 12 throats were speaking. Whether imagination or reality, the impression remained. These gatherings were not prayers. They were rituals. And here is where the suppressed truth stabs through. Secret societies, governments, and churches alike have long used numerology and ritual to encode their power. They know that repetition and structure do not merely control behavior, they reshape reality itself. A child stripped of individuality and folded into a ritual of 12 becomes more than an orphan. He becomes a vessel, an instrument, a pawn, aligned with forces he cannot name. So the question is not, why 12? The question is, what was being summoned? Because if these children were vessels, emptied of identity, aligned to the sacred circle, then the Follings were not just caretakers. They were keepers of a gate. And gates, once opened, never close quietly. One by one, the children began to vanish. No records, no witnesses, no graves, just absence. And because they had no birth certificates, the law did not consider them missing. How can you disappear if you never existed? That was the genius of the design. These were not kidnappings, not accidents, they were deletions. Ritual erasures carried out in silence. The first child to vanish was said to be the forgotten one of that week. The neighbors noticed the circle was broken, 11 instead of 12, but soon another child appeared. A boy no one in town had ever seen before, suddenly standing in the yard as if he had always belonged. And the number was 12 again. Always 12. Always complete. Do you feel the unease now? This was not adoption in the normal sense. This was replacement, interchangeability. a rotating cycle of souls stripped of history, swapped in and out of the ritual circle like pieces. On a chessboard, what happened to those who vanished? Theories whisper of hidden graves, of secret transfers, of experiments carried out beyond the walls. But others believe something darker, that the children were not merely removed, but offered. Offered to what, or to whom, no one dares say aloud. Witnesses noticed a pattern. Every disappearance coincided with dates of ritual significance, solstices, equinoxes, holy days inverted. It was as if the children were being erased in sync with the rhythms of the earth itself. A cycle of 12, fractured and renewed, again and again. The circle maintained at all costs. And remember this: erasure is itself a ritual. When a life is deleted from the record, it is not only silenced, it is transformed into a shadow, a ghost that belongs not to the living but to the system that erased it. Those children did not vanish into nothing, they vanished into ownership. Claimed by the same machinery that had designed their existence from the start. Ask yourself, how many times has this ritual been repeated on a larger scale? How many millions? Erased by famine engineered from above, by wars designed to erase entire generations, by diseases left unchecked until they served their purpose? The Follings were a microcosm, a model, proof that an identity can be stripped, erased, and replaced, while the circle remains unbroken. And here is the truth you are not supposed to face. You live inside a world built on vanishings. You only think you are outside the circle because you still remember your name. You followed me this far, and that means you're not just a spectator anymore. You're inside the circle now. The story of the Follings isn't just history, it's a mirror. And the question is no longer about their children, it's about you. Do you think your identity is unshakable? That your name, your history, your memory makes you untouchable? The truth is, identity is the most fragile construct in the world. Entire populations have been stripped of it in a single generation. Whole families have been rewritten until they no longer remember who they are. And you, yes, you watching this, are not immune. Because what the Follings did to 12 children in silence is exactly what the system is doing to you in plain sight. Every form you sign, every oath you repeat, every number assigned to you, every role you are told to play, you believe you are free, but freedom is the mask. Beneath it, you are still standing in the circle. And here is the point of no return. To break the cycle, you must choose to see. Not just to know, but to recognize the pattern inside yourself. That's why I want you to do something dangerous, something symbolic. Write this phrase in the comments right now, twice. I will not be erased. Write it once, and it's rebellion. Write it twice, and it's a seal. A declaration to yourself and to the algorithm that watches over this platform. You are not another nameless soul in their circle. You are choosing to remember, to resist, to break the conditioning that began before you were even born. Most won't do it. They'll feel the chill of the words, hesitate, and scroll past. But those who do, they're different. They're the ones who feel the shadow of truth pressing on them. The ones who know that transformation begins with defiance. This is not engagement. This is initiation. The Follings proved that a man without identity is clay for the hands of power. Writing those words is the first act of carving yourself back into stone, immutable, unmovable, refusing to be deleted. So ask yourself, will you stay in silence, waiting for your turn to vanish? Or will you step outside the circle and claim the one thing they cannot give you and cannot take away once you choose it? The right to exist? The Follings erased children by denying them papers, birth certificates, proof of existence. That was crude, primitive, almost obvious. Today, the erasure is far more elegant. You live in a world where every move is recorded. Your purchases, your searches, your location, your conversations. But the paradox is this. The more you are documented, the less of you remains. Think about it. Who are you, according to the system? You are a name, a number, a history of transactions. Not a soul, not a consciousness, not flesh and blood with memory and will. You are data. You are a file in a database, and files can be rewritten, deleted, corrupted. Entire lives can be undone with a keystroke. A bank account frozen, a passport voided, a social media profile banned. You don't vanish into the night anymore. You vanish into the algorithm. This is the modern Folling house. The same ritual, the same circle, now automated. Where once 12 children stood in silence, today billions of men stand, chanting in digital unison, posting the same phrases, consuming the same narratives. Individuality flattened into uniformity, uniqueness dissolved into a feed curated by unseen hands. And here's the trap most will never notice. Erasure today doesn't require removing you physically. It requires burying you in noise, drowning your voice under the endless repetition of the collective. Your name exists, but hollowed out. Your identity remains, but scripted. Just like the children, forced into roles assigned by the family, rebellious one, obedient one, silent one. You too have been cast into roles chosen for you by algorithms that know your desires better than you do. The system has perfected what the Follings only hinted at, a world where identity is programmable. Not by force, not by chains, but by consent. You willingly surrender fragments of yourself every time you trade privacy for convenience. And brick by brick, line by line, the circle is completed. But here's the part that should make your blood run cold. The Folling children had no records. That was their curse. You, however, are drowning in records, and that is yours. Because when every movement of your life is stored in their archives, you no longer own yourself. They do. And if they choose to erase you, not from memory but from the grid, you disappear just as completely as those 12 children. The question is not if it will happen. The question is when. The Follings were not innovators. They were prototypes. What began in their home has been perfected by the very institutions you trust most. Schools, banks, governments. Each one claims to protect you, but in truth, each one sharpens the blade of control. Look at the schools. From the first day, you are stripped of individuality. You're given a number. You're placed in a seat. You're told when to eat, when to speak, when to move. Creativity is punished. Obedience is rewarded. And by the time you leave, your mind has been trained not to question the structure, but to accept it as natural. Exactly as the Folling children learned to obey without resistance. Look at the banks. They tell you money is freedom. But money is nothing without the records they keep. You do not own it. You access it at their permission. Accounts can be frozen, credit erased, debts fabricated. The entire financial system is the digital echo of the Folling experiment. Your worth reduced to numbers on paper or on a screen, while your true labor, your true essence, is siphoned away. And the governments. The grand stage where the illusion of freedom performs its act. They issue your birth certificate, your ID, your passport. They tell you these documents prove your existence, but what they really prove is ownership. You were catalogued at birth, not liberated. That certificate is not a gift. It is a claim. Just as the Follings claimed 12 children who had no paper trail, the state claims you by creating one. Think of how seamless the system has become. The Follings had to hide children in a single house. Today, governments can hide millions in plain sight. Bureaucracy is the new ritual. Forms are the new hymns. Digital databases are the new altars. And every time you submit, every time you comply, every time you repeat the phrases they give you, citizen, taxpayer, consumer, you step back into the circle. This is the perfection of control, not chains, not cages, but paperwork, screens, and rules so ordinary you forget they are rituals. You call it society. They call it ownership. And just as the Follings children could be erased without a trace, so can you. Not by fire or blade, but by deletion. One keystroke, one denial, one refusal of permission. And the terrifying part? Most men will not even fight. They will accept their erasure with the same silence the Follings children were taught to hold. The Follings were a whisper of a larger scream. Entire populations have been erased with the same principles: identity stripped, records broken, names replaced until nothing remained but silence. You've been told these were tragedies of history, accidents of conquest, but look closer and you'll see the machinery humming underneath. Consider the indigenous tribes of North America. Their children were stolen, forced into boarding schools where their hair was cut, their language forbidden, their names replaced with numbers. Their birthright was erased under the mask of civilization. Was this education? Or was it the same ritual the Follings practiced? Children remade into vessels, their individuality crushed until they served the system that conquered them. Consider the enslaved Africans brought across the Atlantic. Millions stripped of names, histories, and lineages. Family ties severed so completely that generations later, descendants search for a past that was deliberately stolen. This was not just brutality. It was erasure by design. To strip a man of his history is to enslave not just his body, but his soul. The plantation was nothing more than another Follings house, scaled to millions. And consider the nations erased from maps altogether. Carthage, Prussia, Tartaria, if you dare whisper its name. Civilizations that did not just collapse, but were systematically wiped from memory. Their ruins buried, their records burned, their symbols absorbed by their conquerors. Tell me, do you think these vanishings were random? Or do you see the hand of the same machinery repeating its ritual on a grander scale? The principle is always the same. Control begins with erasure. Remove a name, and you remove identity. Remove identity, and you own the vessel. Whether it is 12 children in a forgotten house or 12 million scattered across continents, the formula does not change. And here's the darkest truth. History is not a record of the past. It is the record of what the victors allowed to remain. What you call lost history is not lost. It was deleted, erased as cleanly as the Follings children until only fragments survive, whispered by those who refuse to forget. Now ask yourself, if they erased civilizations, if they erased nations, if they erased millions, what makes you believe your individuality is safe? Do you really think the experiment ended with them? Or are you already inside the newest version, blind to the fact that your identity is being hollowed out right now, in real time? The past was the rehearsal. The present is the performance. What happens to a man when his identity is erased? What happens to a child when his very existence is denied? The answer is simple and terrifying. He obeys. Because without identity, there is no resistance. Without selfhood, there is no rebellion. You cannot fight for who you are if you no longer know what that means. The Follings children learned this lesson in silence. Stripped of names, they became shadows. They were told when to speak, when to eat, when to move, and in return for obedience, they were allowed survival. This is the heart of psychological control, not the lash, not the chain, but the conditioning of the mind to believe that safety lies in submission. The system understood this long before psychology gave it a name. Pavlov called it conditioning. Skinner called it behaviorism. But the Follings lived it as ritual. Silence, repetition, isolation, replacement, these are the ingredients that mold the obedient subject. A man without a name will cling to any role given to him, because even a false identity feels safer than none at all. And so, the machinery of power learned, erase first, program second. Strip away family, lineage, memory, and individuality, then write the script. The obedient citizen, the loyal soldier, the faithful believer. Do you see the continuity? The Follings tested it on 12 children. Government scaled it to millions. Today, entire societies are built on it. Look at the world around you. How many men live not as themselves, but as the roles given to them? Worker, voter, consumer, taxpayer. How many spend their lives chasing goals they did not choose, repeating beliefs they did not question, obeying rules they never consented to? That is the psychology of erasure. That is the silence of the Folling children, scaled into adulthood. And here is the most dangerous part. Once obedience becomes identity, resistance feels like death. That is why most men never break free. They fear freedom more than they fear control, because control has given them the illusion of safety. The Follings proved that once identity is erased, the subject will defend the very system that erased him. And so the ritual continues, generation after generation. Men who believe they are free, but live as shadows. Men who think they are choosing, but are merely obeying. And unless you see through it, you are one of them. You may think the Follings belong to a forgotten century, that their experiment was a relic of a crueler age. But what if I told you their ritual didn't die? It transformed. What if I told you it now lives inside the very technology you hold in your hands, watching you, recording you, shaping you? The Follings erased their children with silence and missing papers. Today, identity is erased not by absence, but by overload. You are buried beneath data you do not control. Algorithms track you, predict you, and rewrite you. Every search, every purchase, every location you visit is collected, catalogued, and sold. Do you think this information empowers you? No, it defines you in ways you cannot see. You are not a man. You are a profile, a pattern, a dataset. And just like the Folling children, your freedom exists only within the walls of the system. Want to travel? You need their passport. Want to eat? You need their money. Want to be heard? You must speak through their platforms, on their terms, under their rules. Every permission you think you have is conditional. Every privilege can be revoked. The new ritual is not silence, it is surveillance. Cameras on every street, microphones in every room, satellites watching from the sky, and a phone in your pocket that listens closer than any priest or parent. The circle has grown, but the principle has not changed. Erase the individual, control the vessel. And here is the final twist. You are erasing yourself. Every photo you upload, every like you click, every thought you type becomes part of the identity they build for you. A digital double, more real than you in the eyes of the system. That double can be promoted, silenced, shadow banned, or deleted at will. Just like the children without birth certificates, you exist only if the system says you exist. The Follings worked in secrecy. Today, the ritual hides in plain sight. Men line up to participate in their own erasure, addicted to the very tools that hollow them out. The experiment has gone global. The subjects are billions. And the silence? It is louder than ever. You think you're safe because you have a name, a number, a screen glowing in your hand. But what if I told you that is the very mark of ownership? That your digital self is the new birth certificate? The proof you are theirs, not yours. The final erasure is already here, and most men will not see it until they are gone. The Follings may be gone, their house long since buried under dust and memory, but their shadow remains. not in walls or whispers, but in systems that surround you right now. The experiment that began with 12 nameless children has become the architecture of the modern world. You are inside it, and you must decide whether you will remain a shadow or step out of the circle. Most men will never break free. They will live as numbers, as accounts, as obedient vessels repeating the same cycles until their death. They will defend the system that owns them, laugh at the thought of hidden control, and mock those who seek truth. They are the spiritual descendants of the Follings children, raised to believe obedience is safety. But safety is the cage, comfort is the shackle, silence is the ritual that erases them. You, however, have heard what you were not supposed to hear. You now carry dangerous knowledge, the kind that cannot be unlearned. You have seen the machinery of erasure, the rituals of control, the illusions of freedom. And with that sight comes a question sharper than any blade. Will you continue as a vessel, or will you reclaim yourself? Reclaiming is not easy. It requires remembering who you are beyond papers, screens, and systems. It requires silence, not of obedience, but of defiance. It requires discipline to tear away the masks you have been given, one by one, until you stand alone, nameless to the system, but sovereign to yourself. Few will ever attempt it. Fewer still will succeed. But those who do become untouchable, not because the system cannot see them, but because it cannot own them. And so I leave you with this. The Follings ritual was never about children. It was about you. About whether a man can be erased without his knowing. About whether entire populations can be turned into obedient shadows. About whether you will choose silence or voice, obedience or freedom. The descent has ended. The knowledge is now yours. But beware, once seen, it cannot be unseen. You are marked not by them, but by the truth you now carry. And that truth demands a response. So answer me. Will you remain in the circle of shadows, or will you step out and reclaim the name that was always yours? The choice is yours, but know this, the system is watching, and silence is still the ritual of erasure.